Ever get that sinking feeling? You know that feeling when a conversation starts to go so wrong? Like
Yeah.
voices get raised and points get missed, and then uh, everyone's just like walking on eggshells.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've all been there, right?
Right.
And that's what we're diving deep into today.
Yeah.
So we're talking all about the book, Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High.
It's a classic, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
This book really digs into like all those high stakes discussions and, where emotions are running high and people's opinions are clashing.
Oh, yeah.
And it really matters. Like the outcome of these conversations matters.
Yeah, it does for sure. And, sometimes I'm just like, oh, I just shut down.
Oh, yeah.
When things get heated.
Yeah.
And that's not exactly a recipe for success, right?
Not at all.
So this book, it claims that it's all about achieving dialogue, not like winning an argument.
Right.
What's the difference there?
Yeah. So think about it this way. Imagine like a project at work is going off the rails. And instead of like everyone pointing fingers and being super defensive, they all like openly share their concerns, their ideas, and like even what they're feeling, And that's like the shared pool of meaning that the authors talk about in the book.
So it's more like almost like a brainstorming session where everyone feels safe enough to contribute, even if their perspective is different.
Exactly. And that's what's so powerful about dialogue. It's not about silencing those voices that like disagree with you, but it's about encouraging them because that's how you get to the best solutions, right? But here's the thing. The book really like nails this. You have to start with heart, meaning before you even open your mouth to say anything, you have to check your own intentions. Like, why are you even in this conversation?
Okay, hold up. So I'm picturing like a really cheesy motivational poster right now.
Uh-huh.
But be more specific. What do you mean by start with heart?
So it's about asking yourself, what do I really want out of this conversation? Is it to just prove that I'm right? Or to vent my frustration? Or is it to actually find a solution that works for everyone involved?
Right.
And it's so easy to get caught up in what the authors call sucker's choices. Like when you think you have to choose between honesty or peace.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
I'm such a peacekeeper, so I've definitely avoided speaking up when I should have, just to avoid any conflict.
Yeah.
But then I end up, like, resenting the situation later.
Yeah, and that's a classic sucker's choice.
Oh, for sure.
The book argues that it's not an either situation. You can be honest and respectful. You can be assertive and maintain harmony.
Right.
It's about like expanding your options, not limiting them. And that all starts with getting really honest with yourself about what you truly want to get out of this conversation.
So it's like almost like a quick internal checkup before, you're diving into this potentially explosive conversation.
Exactly. It's like, putting on your own oxygen mask first.
Yeah.
Before you assist others.
Okay, I'm starting to see, like, how this mindset shift can be so important.
Yeah.
But let's be real. In the heat of the moment, it's so easy to forget all these good intentions.
Right. Well, yeah.
So how do we stay on track, when things start to get really emotional?
That's where what the authors call learning to look comes in.
Yeah.
So they say we need to pay attention to the content of the conversation, like what's being said.
Right.
But also the conditions, like how it's being said.
So it's not just about like the words themselves, but also the tone of voice, body language, the overall vibe of the conversation.
Precisely, because those nonverbal cues can often speak volumes. And the authors identify these two big red flags that signal things are going off the rails: silence and violence.
Okay, wait. Violence, we're not talking about like physical fights.
No, not necessarily. It's more about any attempt to force your viewpoint on someone without considering their perspective. Think about it like interrupting, attacking, or like controlling the conversation.
Oh, so it's about like that aggression that shuts down the dialogue rather than encouraging it.
Right. And then there's silence, which in this case is not golden. In this context, it's about withholding information, masking your true opinions, or just withdrawing from the conversation altogether.
So it's like that passive-aggressive approach where you're stewing in resentment, but not actually addressing the issue head on.
Exactly. And both silence and violence, they come from the same place, feeling unsafe. When we don't feel safe to express ourselves honestly and openly, we turn to these unhealthy patterns. That's why the book puts so much emphasis on creating a safe space for dialogue.
Okay, I'm on board with like needing safety.
Yeah.
But how do we actually create it? It's not like we can just like snap our fingers and suddenly everyone just feels comfortable sharing their deepest fears and frustrations.
It definitely takes more than wishful thinking. The book gives some really practical techniques, but it really boils down to two things: mutual purpose and mutual respect.
Okay, so let's start with mutual purpose. Does that mean everyone has to agree on everything before you can even start talking?
Not necessarily. It's more about acknowledging that everyone involved has a stake in the outcome,
Yeah.
even if their desired outcome differs.
Yeah.
Remember that project going off the rails? Maybe the manager wants to meet the deadline.
Okay.
The team is worried about burnout, and the client wants these very specific features. Their goals aren't identical,
Right.
but they're all connected to the project's success.
So it's less about everyone, singing Kumbaya together.
Right.
And more about recognizing you're all in the same boat, even if you're rowing in slightly different directions.
Exactly. And when that shared purpose starts to, waver,
Yeah.
that's when things can go wrong. So the book has this handy acronym for getting back on track.
Oh, I love a good acronym. Lay it on me.
It's called CRIB.
Okay, CRIB. What does that stand for?
So it stands for commit, recognize, invent, and brainstorm. So let's say you're in this heated discussion with your partner about household chores.
Okay.
Things are getting really tense, and you're starting to feel that sucker's choice creeping in again.
Okay, yeah, I'm already triggered just thinking about this.
Right. So let's say you're feeling super overwhelmed by, the division of labor.
Yeah.
So how does SRIB help? Well, first, you commit to seeking mutual purpose.
Okay.
So you remind yourself and your partner that you both want a clean and happy home. You're not enemies, you're on the same team, even if you disagree on how to get there.
That's a good starting point. What's next?
Then you recognize the purpose behind the strategy. So maybe your partner isn't trying to be lazy. Maybe they're super stressed about work and they feel like they're already doing their best.
All right.
Or maybe they have a totally different definition of what clean means.
So it's about taking a step back and trying to understand the why behind their actions.
Yes.
Not just judging the actions themselves.
Exactly. And then comes the fun part. Invent a mutual purpose. So maybe instead of arguing about who does what, you brainstorm a new system together. Maybe you divide chores based on what you each enjoy or are good at.
Oh, yeah.
Or you agree to hire a cleaning service once a month to lighten the load for both of you.
I like that one. Outsourcing for the win. And then what's the final B for?
Brainstorm. So you brainstorm new strategies to achieve that mutual purpose. And this is where you get creative and you collaborate, Maybe you try a chore chart. Maybe you try a rotating schedule. Maybe you try a reward system. The point is you're working together to find a solution that works for both of you, not just demanding things your way.
So SRIB is this roadmap for when we feel like we're just talking past each other. It helps to reestablish that shared purpose and move towards a more collaborative approach. But what about that other crucial element we were talking about, mutual respect? How do we make sure that's there, especially when, tempers are flaring?
That is a great question and a perfect place to pick up in part 2.
Okay, so we've talked about mutual respect as being this key ingredient for having a productive, crucial conversation.
Right.
But how do we make sure that we're actually, cultivating that respect, especially when we're talking to someone who's really pushing our buttons?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that respect isn't about, agreeing with someone.
Okay.
You can fundamentally disagree with someone's viewpoint and still treat them with respect.
No.
It's about valuing them as a person.
Okay.
Even if you don't value their opinions or what they're saying.
In this instance, yeah.
Exactly.
I can see how that could be really tricky, especially when, things are getting heated.
Yeah.
It's so easy to let things get personal.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you don't really mean for them to.
Absolutely. And that's where the book offers some really practical tools. One of the most powerful techniques is what they call contrasting.
Contrasting. I don't think we've talked about that yet.
Yep.
What is that?
So it's a way of clarifying your intentions.
Okay.
When you sense that the other person is misinterpreting what you're saying, or maybe even what you're doing, you start by stating what you don't mean.
Okay.
Followed by what you do mean.
So, for example, if you're giving feedback to a colleague.
Right.
And they get all defensive.
Yeah.
You might say something like, look, I don't want you to think I'm, criticizing all of your work.
Right.
I'm just trying to point out this specific area where I think we could maybe, improve things.
Exactly. It helps to kind of address those unspoken fears or assumptions that can sometimes just completely derail a conversation.
Totally.
By explicitly stating what you're not saying.
Yeah.
It gives the other person space to hear what you are saying without feeling attacked.
That's so smart. It's like proactively diffusing a bomb
Yeah.
before it goes off. And what about apologies? When are those appropriate in these crucial conversations?
Yeah, so apologies are super powerful, but they have to be genuine.
Right.
Like if you've actually done something to disrespect the other person,
Yeah.
owning up to it,
Yeah.
and sincerely apologizing can go a long way toward rebuilding that trust.
Okay, so we've talked about creating that safe space for dialogue. But what about, like, managing our own emotions?
Yeah.
How do we stay calm and collected when we're feeling super triggered or overwhelmed or whatever?
Yeah, so this is where the book goes into this like really interesting concept of mastering our stories.
Right.
It's this idea that our emotions aren't directly caused by events,
Okay.
but by the stories we tell ourselves about those events.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about these stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, so let's say your boss gives you some critical feedback on a project.
Yeah.
You could tell yourself the story that she's like out to get you,
Yeah.
that she doesn't appreciate your hard work, and maybe this is even a sign that your job is in jeopardy.
Okay, I've definitely gone down that road before.
Right. But what if instead you told yourself the story that she sees, potential in you,
Right.
and that she's just trying to help you improve your skills?
Yeah.
Same event,
Totally a different story, though.
completely different story, and a totally different emotional reaction.
So it's not about, like, denying our feelings, but it's more about questioning the narratives that are driving those feelings in the first place.
Exactly. The book really encourages us to become like emotional detectives,
Ooh, I like that.
to retrace our emotional path and see if those stories we're telling ourselves are actually like accurate
Okay.
and helpful.
Give me an example of how this emotional detective work would, like, look in real life.
Okay, so let's say you're feeling really frustrated because your partner forgot to pick up the dry cleaning again.
Oh, yeah.
So instead of, immediately jumping to anger and accusations,
Right.
you pause and ask yourself, what's the story I'm telling myself right now? Maybe it's they don't care about me,
Yeah.
or they're always so thoughtless.
I've definitely said those to myself.
But those stories might not be the whole picture.
Right.
Maybe they got like caught up at work, or maybe they just have a different way of prioritizing tasks.
Okay.
The book gives us this like framework for separating those stories from the facts.
Okay.
So you notice your behavior, like getting angry, you identify your feelings, like that frustration and resentment, you analyze your story like that they don't care story, and then you get back to the facts.
Yeah.
They forgot the dry cleaning, that's it.
So it's like hitting the pause button
Yeah.
on our emotional reactions and actually, like, taking a minute to examine those stories. But what if, when we look closely, we realize those stories are actually based on, like, legitimate concerns?
Right.
What then?
So that's where the next step comes in, which is effectively stating your path.
Okay.
And this is where the book, gives us some really practical advice again.
Okay, I'm ready. Actionable tips. Let's go.
They give us this handy acronym, STATE.
Okay, state. I'm sensing a pattern here. These authors really love acronyms. But, okay, break down STATE for me.
Okay, so it stands for share, tell, ask, talk, and encourage.
Okay.
So it's basically a framework for expressing yourself, like assertively,
Okay.
but respectfully,
Yeah.
making sure that your message is heard
Right.
without, shutting down the dialogue.
Okay.
So you start by sharing the facts. In our dry cleaning example, you might just say, hey, I noticed you forgot to pick up the dry cleaning again.
So just starting with the truth, the objective truth.
Exactly. Then you tell your story.
Okay.
So you might say something like, when you forget the dry cleaning, it makes me feel like my time isn't valued because I end up like scrambling to get ready
Right.
and get things done.
So you're owning your feelings and explaining how those facts are, like, connected to your emotional response.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then comes the super important part.
Okay.
You ask for their path. You might say something like, can you help me understand, like, what happened there? What's going on from your perspective?
So it's shifting from you did this wrong to help me understand what's happening here.
Exactly. And then you talk tentatively, which means you're presenting your story as just that. A story,
Okay.
not the absolute truth.
Right.
So you might say, it seems like this is, kind of a recurring pattern,
Yeah.
but I might be misinterpreting things. Help me see it from your side.
So it's about humility, acknowledging that our perspective isn't the only valid one.
Exactly. And finally, you encourage testing. This means inviting the other person to, challenge your assumptions,
Okay.
offer different interpretations, and share their thoughts and feelings without feeling judged.
So it's about, like, fostering that open and honest exchange
Right.
where both people feel safe to share everything.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's how you create that shared pool of meaning,
Yeah.
that space where real understanding and connection can happen.
This is all really great, this whole framework.
Yeah.
But of course, communication is a two-way street. It's not just about expressing ourselves clearly. It's also about actually listening to the other person.
Right.
And I'll be honest, that's where I struggle.
Yeah.
I'm a much better talker than a listener.
Mm-hmm.
So any tips for becoming a more effective listener, especially in those crucial conversations?
Yeah, I'm happy to share some insights on that. Let's explore that in part 3.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
From setting the stage for productive conversation, managing our own emotions, and how to actually express ourselves clearly.
Right.
But what about the other side of that? How do we actually become better listeners?
Right.
Especially, when the conversation is really heated.
Well, active listening it's super crucial in any conversation, but especially in those high stakes situations where, everyone's emotions are running high.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just sit there, nod politely, pretend to be listening. You have to really engage with what the other person is saying.
Right.
Both verbally and non-verbally.
And I'm so guilty of selective hearing, I'll admit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hear what I want to hear.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, I filter out the rest.
We all do it to some extent, for sure.
Yeah.
But, in these crucial conversations, that kind of selective listening
Yeah.
can lead to, big misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And even, missed opportunities for connection.
Right.
So the book actually has this great technique
Okay.
for becoming a more active listener.
Okay, I'm ready.
It's called the AMPP technique.
Okay, another acronym. I'm starting to think these authors have, a secret stash of alphabet soup somewhere.
Right?
But okay, so what is AMPP? What does that stand for?
So it stands for ask, mirror, paraphrase, and prime.
Okay.
It's this 4-step process to make sure that you're not just hearing the words,
Right.
but you're actually understanding the meaning and the emotions behind the words.
Oh, okay, I like that. So let's break it down. What's the ask all about?
So it's all about, expressing genuine curiosity about the other person's viewpoint.
Right. Asking these open-ended questions that invite them to share, more of their thoughts and feelings.
Okay.
Instead of saying something like, why are you so upset about this?
Yeah.
You might ask, well, what's making you feel so strongly about this situation?
So it's shifting from a defensive posture to a more inquisitive approach.
Exactly.
With empathy.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I like that. And then we have mirror. What is that about?
So mirror involves reflecting back, the emotions that you're sensing
Okay.
from the other person.
Right.
You're acknowledging and validating their feelings.
Yeah.
You might say, I can see that you're really frustrated right now.
Yeah.
Or it sounds like this is a really sensitive topic for you.
Okay, so it's not about mimicking their emotions or anything.
Right.
But it's about showing them that you're tuned into their emotional state.
Exactly.
And that you actually care about how they're feeling.
Exactly.
Okay, and then paraphrase. What is that? So paraphrase means restating what you've heard the other person say, but in your own words.
Right.
Just to make sure you're understanding them correctly. So you might say something like, so if I'm hearing you right, you're feeling overwhelmed because you've got way too much on your plate right now.
So it's a verbal check-in, am I getting this right?
Yeah, and it shows the other person you're actually listening to them.
Yeah.
And trying to see their point of view.
Totally. And then finally we have prime. What is that?
So prime is if the other person seems like they're, hesitant to share,
Uh-huh.
you can try to gently prime the conversation
Yeah.
by offering your best guess about what they might be thinking or
Yeah.
feeling.
This sounds tricky. How do you do that without, putting words in their mouth?
It's all about being tentative and respectful, You might say, it seems like you're a bit apprehensive about this change. Is that right?
Okay.
Or, I'm sensing some hesitation here. Are there any concerns that you'd like to share?
So it's about, inviting them to open up.
Yeah.
Without forcing them to.
Exactly. It's about creating that safe space again.
Right.
Where they feel comfortable sharing, even if it's different from your perspective.
Right. Okay. So AMPP is a toolkit for being a more engaged and empathetic listener.
Yeah.
But what happens once we've, actively listened and understood the other person's perspective?
Right.
How do we respond in a way that actually, moves the conversation forward?
That's where the ABCs of responding come in.
Okay.
Agree, build, and compare.
Okay.
So you start by agreeing with any of the points that you can genuinely agree with.
Okay.
This helps establish, like, common ground.
Right.
And it shows the other person that you're not just focused on your own perspective.
Right. You're meeting them halfway.
Exactly. And then you build on those points of agreement,
Yeah.
adding your own insights or
Right.
information that supports or even expands on, what's already been said.
So you're like collaborating to understand the situation, basically.
Yeah. And then there's compare, which is how you handle points of disagreement.
Right.
So instead of arguing or trying to convince the other person that they're wrong, you
Yeah.
simply compare your different perspectives,
Yeah.
highlighting, the areas where you see things differently.
So you're acknowledging the differences without like judgment.
Exactly. It's about respecting the validity of both perspectives and trying to understand, like, the reasons behind those differences.
This whole framework is so powerful, like from creating safety
Yeah.
to mastering our stories
Uh-huh.
to active listening and responding constructively. It's really great.
It is.
But how do we know when it's time to go from like just talking
Yeah.
to actually making decisions?
That's a great question. And the book is really clear about, like, the importance of separating dialogue from decision making. Just because you've had this, like, healthy, productive conversation doesn't mean you've actually reached a decision.
So how do we make that transition then from talking to deciding?
So the book says to consider who needs to be involved in the decision,
Okay.
who has the expertise, who has the authority.
Right.
Sometimes a simple command decision is the way to go,
Right.
especially when it's like an urgent situation.
Yeah.
But for most of these crucial conversations, a more collaborative approach is better.
Yeah. And I imagine like consensus is usually the goal,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not always realistic,
Not always.
especially when you're like under time pressure.
Right, exactly. So the key is to choose a decision-making method,
Okay.
fits the situation and what
Right.
you're trying to accomplish.
And once a decision is made,
Then you've got to finish clearly.
okay, what does that mean? Finish clearly.
So it's about making sure everyone understands, like, what the decision is,
Okay.
their roles and responsibilities, and the specific next steps,
Well,
like
yeah.
who does what by when,
Yeah.
what are the deliverables,
Right.
and when are you going to follow up to make sure things are on track?
So you can't just like agree in principle and then just hope for the best. You have to have like a plan,
Yeah.
a clear action plan.
Yeah, a decision without action is just an empty promise,
Totally. Wow, this has been such an insightful deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for, approaching those tough conversations.
That's great.
And as we wrap up here, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay.
What is one conversation in your life that, if handled differently, could lead to a much better outcome?
That's a really powerful question. And I think it's a good reminder that we all have the power to transform our relationships and our lives.
Absolutely.
One conversation at a time.
One conversation at a time. So true.
Yeah.
So go forth, dear listeners, and have those crucial conversations
Yes.
with courage and compassion
Yes.
and a commitment to creating a more harmonious and productive world.
That's a great way to put it.